He fought for his country, yet when he needed support, the system turned away, until Trump stepped in. The White House lawn stretched wide beneath the bright afternoon sun, a vast sea of crisp uniforms and gleaming polished metals catching the light. It was a day of honor, flags waving, speeches praising the military, the national anthem soaring through the air, a celebration of service, sacrifice, and patriotism. At the heart of it all stood President Donald Trump, shaking hands with generals, nodding as high-ranking officers expressed their appreciation, exchanging words with dignitaries. Cameras tracked his every move, journalists jotted down notes, and the world watched. But then, something caught his eye. At the very edge of the crowd, just beyond the official seating, stood a lone Marine. He wasn't slouched or disengaged. Far from it. His stance was firm, his uniform spotless, ribbons perfectly aligned. Everything about him radiated discipline. Yet, it was his eyes that held Trump's attention. Something buried deep within them, a weight no medal could ever lift. Trump had met countless servicemen and women before, but this was different. He shifted slightly, signaling his aides and security to hold back. Then, without hesitation, he stepped away from the structured order of the event and walked straight toward the Marine. The cameras faltered for a moment before quickly adjusting, swinging around to capture the moment. Sergeant Daniel Briggs stiffened the instant he saw Trump approaching. He had been through enough ceremonies to know the routine. The president would shake his hand, say a quick "thank you for your service," and move on. But this time, there was no hurried handshake. No brief exchange of words. Instead, Trump studied him, not like a politician sizing up a voter, but the way a man looks at another man, measuring something deeper. Trump extended his hand. "What's your name, son?" Briggs hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Sergeant Daniel Briggs, sir." Trump gripped his hand firmly, holding it a second longer than expected. His eyes never left Briggs' face. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," Trump said, his tone not rehearsed, but personal. "What's going on?" Briggs swallowed, feeling the weight of the cameras, the dozens, no hundreds of eyes on him. He could play it safe, say something polite, and let this moment pass. But there was something about the way Trump asked, the way he waited. It made it impossible to brush off. Briggs exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm not sure this is the right place." Trump shook his head. "Right place, wrong place, doesn't matter. Talk to me." Briggs hesitated again. Years of training had drilled one thing into him. Marines don't complain. Marines don't make excuses. But now, the commander-in-chief stood in front of him, not just asking, but listening. For the first time in a long time, he felt like someone in power actually wanted to hear him. He took a slow breath, eyes locking onto Trump's. Then, with cameras rolling, the crowd silent, and the entire world watching, Sergeant Briggs started talking. 15 years. Afghanistan. Iraq. Syria. He had followed orders, pushed through pain, buried friends, and done his job. No complaints. His jaw clenched slightly before he continued. But coming home, that's been the hardest part. Trump gave a small nod, listening, not like a politician waiting for his turn to speak, but actually hearing him. Briggs exhaled, forcing himself to keep going. "My wife, Naomi, she's a nurse, or she was, had to leave her job to take care of our son. He was born with cerebral palsy, needs full-time care." He paused, rubbing his thumb against his palm, the only sign of his frustration. "We tried everything. The VA, state assistance, took months just to get someone on the phone. But the bills don't stop. The debt doesn't stop. I re-enlisted just to keep a paycheck coming, but now I'm up against it. We're drowning, sir." He hadn't meant to say that last part out loud, but there it was, out in the open. The words hung between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Trump's face didn't change, but in his eyes, something flickered. A deeper understanding. A recognition, one Trump had seen before. Men who gave everything, only to return to nothing. Briggs swallowed hard. He wasn't looking for pity, wasn't asking for a handout. He just wanted to understand. Why did it have to be this way? He forced himself to stand taller, pushing back against the raw emotion clawing its way to the surface. He was a Marine, and Marines don't break. "I'm not asking for anything special," he said, his voice firm now. "I just don't understand how a man can serve his country, risk his life for it, and come back to nothing." The silence that followed? Heavy. The kind that made people shift in their seats, the kind that made cameras zoom in, capturing every raw detail of the moment. Trump exhaled sharply, his gaze darkening. "You're telling me you did your duty, and the government turned its back on you?" Briggs held his stare. "Yes, sir." For a long second, neither of them spoke. The crowd, the press, the aides nearby, they all felt it. The weight of the truth, the rawness of it. Trump turned slightly, glancing toward his team. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. But then, resolve settled in. "Where's my chief of staff?" he called out, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. An aide scrambled away, moving fast. Briggs blinked. What was happening? He had been in the system long enough to know how these things went. Politicians said they cared, made vague promises, then moved on. But this felt different. Trump turned back to him, voice low but firm. "We're fixing this." And for the first time in years, Briggs felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Hope. The tension in the air thickened as a White House aide rushed off. The press pool, once covering a routine event, had shifted to full alert. Microphones extended, cameras zoomed in, news producers whispered urgently into earpieces. Something was happening. Something unscripted. Sergeant Daniel Briggs remained still, his military training keeping his posture locked. But his mind, it raced. He had expected a handshake, maybe a few polite words. Not this. Not the president putting the entire system on notice, right in front of the world. A few feet away, Trump folded his arms, studying Briggs. "You said you reached out to the VA." His voice steady but sharp. "How long did it take to get a response?" Briggs clenched his jaw. 8 months, sir. And even then, they told us they were backlogged." The words sent a shockwave through the crowd. 8 months. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. The press leaned in closer. Even military officials in attendance looked uneasy. Trump exhaled sharply. "That's not just incompetence. That's a disgrace." His words cut through the murmurs, slicing straight through the political noise. "We have billions for foreign aid. Billions for useless government programs. And you're telling me we can't take care of the men and women who fought for this country?" The murmurs grew louder. A few feet away, Tony O'Brien, Trump's chief of staff, appeared, slightly out of breath. "Mr. President." Trump didn't even look at him. His gaze stayed locked on Briggs. "This Marine has been hung out to dry. His kid has cerebral palsy. His wife had to quit her job. The VA isn't doing a damn thing." O'Brien hesitated. "Sir, we—" Trump raised a hand, cutting him off. "No excuses. I want his case on my desk today. And I want a full audit of VA delays, every case like his. Every soldier or Marine getting screwed over. I want names, numbers, reports, by tonight. O'Brien nodded quickly, already pulling out his phone as he stepped away. Briggs stood frozen, stunned. He had spent years buried under government red tape, ignored by agencies that moved at a glacial pace. And now, within 2 minutes, the president had set the entire system into motion. Trump turned to the press, his voice clear, unwavering. We say we support our troops. We love to say it. But what the hell does that even mean? If we let them come home to this? If a man is willing to lay down his life for this country, then this country better damn well take care of him when he gets back. The statement hit hard. Even the reporters, those used to grilling him, paused. Because this wasn't politics. This was personal. Trump looked back at Briggs. You said you weren't asking for handouts. Good, because you shouldn't have to. He extended his hand once more. I don't forget people. We're fixing this, today. Briggs hesitated for just a half-second before gripping Trump's hand. Firm. Steady. A handshake wasn't supposed to mean anything. But this one did. And as the press scrambled to capture the moment, one thing became crystal clear. This story, it was just getting started. The second the handshake happened, the press lost control. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts. Reporters shouted over each other. News producers scrambled to push the footage live. The military appreciation event? It had just turned into something much, much bigger. Mr. President, do you think this is political grandstanding? Will this actually lead to change? Or is this just a public stunt? What about the VA's budget? Where's the funding coming from? Trump, still gripping Briggs' hand, turned slightly toward the press, but didn't let go. His voice cut through the frenzy. I don't give a damn about how this looks, he said, eyes locking onto a CNN reporter. I care about results, Trump stated, his tone firm. This man served his country. His family is suffering. And I'm not about to let bureaucrats bury this in paperwork while his kid suffers. For a brief second, the reporters froze, just long enough for the weight of his words to hit. Then, they went into overdrive. Every major network cut to live coverage, their talking heads scrambling to analyze the moment. Some called it raw leadership, proof that Trump was taking real action. Others labeled it a calculated PR stunt, designed to fire up his base ahead of the election cycle. Fox News ran the headline, Trump goes to war for veterans, demands VA overhaul on the spot. CNN seized on a different angle, Trump uses struggling Marine as political prop, real reform or just a stunt. MSNBC convened a panel, debating whether this was an actual call to action, or just another headline moment that would fade by next week. But outside the media bubble, something bigger was happening. For the first time in years, veterans across the country started speaking out. Former Army Ranger Mike Ramirez posted a viral tweet. Sergeant Briggs isn't alone. I spent a year fighting the VA just to get my PTSD treatment approved. This system is broken. A Navy widow, Jessica McAdams, shared a heartbreaking post about her late husband, who had died waiting for medical care. The VA didn't just fail him. It killed him. Within hours, hashtags like #FixTheVA and #VeteransDeserveBetter were trending nationwide. And while social media exploded, behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. At VA headquarters, top officials panicked. Calls poured in from the White House. High-ranking administrators were summoned for late-night emergency meetings. The pressure was building. There was nowhere to hide. Meanwhile, inside his Arlington home, Sergeant Briggs sat at his kitchen table, watching the news with his wife, Naomi. She had barely spoken since the footage aired. But now, her fingers tightened around his hand, her expression unreadable. "You realize what you've started?" "Right," she whispered. Briggs exhaled slowly. "I didn't start anything. I just told the truth." Naomi shook her head. "No, Daniel. You did something no one else had the chance to do." She met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "You made them listen." But while the nation debated and veterans finally found their voices, another battle had already begun, one that could either cement real change or destroy everything before it even started. Overnight, the clip of Trump and Sergeant Briggs went viral. And it wasn't just political junkies watching, it was everyone. The footage played on morning news shows, dissected in opinion columns, dominating online discussions. Cable networks fought to control the narrative. Fox News called it the moment Washington finally took veterans seriously. CNN framed it as a carefully orchestrated political move. MSNBC asked, "Will this lead to change, or just another flash in the pan?" But outside of TV screens and headlines, something much more powerful was unfolding. Veterans, hundreds of thousands of them, began speaking out. On Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, stories poured in. A former Marine, Greg Lawson, shared, "I was medically discharged with a spinal injury. It took 2 years to get the VA to approve surgery. We're treated like we're disposable." A National Guard widow, Ashley Carter, posted a gut-wrenching thread about her husband, who had taken his own life after waiting 14 months for mental health treatment. "I begged them to see him sooner. Begged. They told us to be patient." Within 48 hours, hashtags like #FixTheVA and #VeteransDeserveBetter had hit #1 nationwide. For the first time in years, veterans weren't just venting in private. They were uniting. And inside Washington, panic. At VA headquarters, a late-night emergency meeting was called. The conference room, packed. Officials, bureaucrats, political aides, all scrambling for answers. "We need a statement," one official said, wiping sweat from his brow under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Something that says we're handling this." "Handling this." Another snapped. "We've got the president demanding full reform, a national firestorm on our hands, and veterans calling us criminals. You think a press release is going to fix that?" Silence. Because the truth. This wasn't a PR problem. This was a structural failure. And now, the entire country knew it. Meanwhile, inside the White House, Trump's Oval Office desk was covered in stacks of veteran case files. Some, just like Briggs, months, even years of delays. Others, worse. Veterans who had died waiting for care. Families who had lost everything fighting the system. Trump flipped through a file, shaking his head. "This is worse than I thought." His chief of staff, Tony O'Brien, shifted uncomfortably. "The VA's been broken for decades," he admitted. "Too much bureaucracy, too much wasted money." Trump's fingers drummed on the desk. "Who's responsible for this mess?" O'Brien hesitated. "Technically, the VA secretary." Trump didn't hesitate. "Fire him." O'Brien exhaled sharply. "Mr. President, that's complicated. Firing a cabinet member over this? It'll send shockwaves through the entire administration." Trump's gaze stayed locked. "Good. Maybe those shockwaves will wake people up." The next morning, Headlines exploded. Trump fires VA secretary in stunning move. Promises immediate reform. The media went wild. Some called it reckless. Others, bold leadership. But among veterans, the reaction was different. For the first time in years, they saw something that wasn't just words. It was real. Back at the Briggs home, Sergeant Briggs sat on his couch, scrolling through his phone. The dim glow of the screen lit up his face as messages flooded in, hundreds of them. Some, from fellow Marines, thanking him for speaking out. Others, reporters, begging for an exclusive interview. And then, the threats. Anonymous emails, voicemails, people calling him a pawn, a fraud, a liar. His jaw tightened. He'd faced enemy fire overseas. But this was something else entirely. Beside him, Naomi crossed her arms. "You're not reading those, are you?" Briggs didn't answer. She sighed, reaching for his hand. "Listen to me. You didn't ask for this, I know. But you did start something." Her voice softened. "And now you have to decide. Do you keep fighting, or do you walk away?" His phone buzzed. An incoming call. The White House. Briggs exhaled. He already knew what was coming. He answered. "Yes, sir." Trump's voice was firm. "I need you in Washington. Tomorrow." Briggs hesitated. "Mr. President, No excuses," Trump cut in. "I want you in the room when we overhaul the VA. You started this fight. Now you're going to help me finish it." Briggs felt his heart hammering in his chest. He was just a Marine, not a politician. But walking away now, that wasn't an option. And as he boarded a plane to Washington the next morning, one thing became crystal clear. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every veteran who had ever been forgotten. And this time, they weren't going to be ignored.